Is the next Dino Crisis game finally here? I don't know about that, but welcome to yet another nerd review. This time we take a look at a small indie game that looks to be the spiritual successor to Dino Crisis, Dinobreak. Dinobreak follows Lydia as she and a handful of survivors must battle their way through a city full of, well, dinosaurs. As I just said, this game is intended to bring players that fell in love with those classic survival horror games like Resident Evil, or more specifically in this case Dino Crisis, and give them a chance to relive that classic feel all over again. Meaning, a game like this is going to include all of those 90s tropes that we saw in our old school survival horror games. Stuff like tank controls, extremely bad dialogue and acting, and even a ridiculous story to go along with that.
It was a long time ago in fall of 1999. Cypress Ridge was enjoying a tranquil, unsuspecting night, none the wiser to what would wait for them the next morning.
So before I continue on with this review, to save you guys some time, if you're not a fan of that classic 90s survival horror gameplay, then I would recommend that you don't pick this game up at all. If you're one of those people that can't get through the older Resident Evil games, first off, shame on you, but more importantly, I definitely doubt you're going to like this one in the slightest. On that same note, just because you're a classic survival horror fan doesn't mean you'll automatically like this game either, because, well, there are some clear flaws, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Before we do that, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more reviews like this one and ranking videos that I do each week on the channel. Also, hit that like button to help promote this video and that bell icon to stay updated for when I post a new video on this channel. So as always with nerd reviews, we're going to start with the most important aspect to any game, the gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, Dinobreak mimics the classic 90s survival horror mechanics, although it does give the player the opportunity to choose between 3 different ways of playing the game. You can play in first person, over the shoulder, or fixed camera angles, all of which features tank controls. With that being said, the way to play this game is definitely with the fixed camera angles. The over-the-shoulder gameplay feels extremely clunky and almost unbearable to play with, while the first-person perspective kind of ruins the nostalgia feel that this game was going for. One of the best things this game has going for it is the nostalgia it brings to the people that love the 90s style of survival horror. You take away fixed camera angles and the game loses its best trait. But even for a game intended to resemble those old school mechanics, the controls are still rough and are really tough to get used to. Even if you grew up playing those classics, it's a little harder to aim, and sometimes you'll find a delay in your character shooting, and other times you might have to click the trigger button multiple times to get off a single shot because of some bugs within the game. However, for the most part, this game does resemble the classics. As far as enemies go, the game lacks variety. Sure, you have about 7 to 8 different enemy types, but the thing is that they all feel almost exactly the same. For example, you have raptors and giant spiders. Funny enough, from a mechanics point of view, there is nothing that makes these 2 creatures stand out from each other. Both move quickly, both relatively the same size with the same speed, and both can poison the player randomly. But another big letdown with the enemy variations is the T-Rex. There are a few of these in the game, but once again, nothing really sets them apart from the other enemies in the game. Sure, they can take a lot more hits than the average raptor, but ultimately, there isn't anything unique about them. Hell, the size of them doesn't even make sense. They are roughly the same height as the player and only a little bit bigger than the average raptor. And I really feel like this was a missed opportunity, because similar to what Dino Crisis did, you could have used this height to your advantage and make it a huge boss fight. Instead, they are just pretty much raptors with a bigger health bar. But let's move on to another key trait in classic survival horror games: resources, and weapons. In my opinion, a key trait to any survival horror game is having limited resources. Now, while this game does start off really well at giving you limited resources to the point I was struggling at first, ultimately I feel like it gives you a little too much wiggle room as the game goes on and you start to find new weapons. For example, during the final phase of the game, I found myself with more ammunition and healing items than I knew what to do with. I wish the game had another level of difficulty that maybe made resources a little more scarce. I don't think that was a deal breaker for me with this game, but it's a minor thing that I feel like they can tweak with maybe a future patch, and it would definitely make the game a little bit more enjoyable. With that being said, the game did do a great job at giving you plenty of weapons to use in different situations, even more so than a lot of survival horror games out there. Just to name a few, you had handguns, shotguns, grenade launchers, assault rifles, and even a damn katana. And a lot of these weapons felt different and usable in different scenarios throughout the game. Really, the only issues that I had with the weapons is that 1, they gave us too many of the same exact weapon throughout the game, and 2, they added a repair mechanic that felt completely pointless. Overall though, the large variety of weapons was a positive in my book. Also, while we're on the topic of items, there are a few things I want to touch on real quick. You do have something similar to ink ribbons and a manual save typewriter in this game. You even have green, blue, and red herbs used the exact same way in Resident Evil games. And you get weapon parts used to upgrade your weapons. You have a similar inventory management system as Resident Evil, and even those famous item boxes are scattered throughout the game, which of course gives us that classic Resident Evil feel. But let's move on to one of the weaker parts of the game, the story. Listen, if you're coming into this game expecting a fantastic story with well-written dialogue and incredible voice acting, then you're in for a really bad time. Sure, the classic survival horror games didn't really have much to write home about in this department. However, this game is much worse than the writing and the story in those classics. The story is almost non-existent and really boring to follow. It's a basic premise. A company caused an outbreak which led to dinosaurs roaming around the city. The city is about to be blown up and the survivors must make it to a chopper in order to escape before the nuke arrives. That's pretty much the entire story in a nutshell. And while the game does aim for cheesiness to match old school survival horror games, it goes above and beyond in that area. The dialogue sounds like a child wrote the script, and the acting seriously sounds like Siri voiced all of the lines.
The specimens are loose and killing everyone.
I couldn't make out a damn thing. The radio also looks busted. Let's just hope someone is on the way.
Oh no, the eggs are hatching. I'm going to try to get somewhere safe. Take out those dinosaurs.
I'm not gonna lie, I think I would have preferred there be no voice lines over that AI-like generated deliveries we got in this game. Still, I don't think any of us were coming into this game expecting any more than that. Hell, the developers even warned us of that on the synopsis of the game. Other than that, there were only 2 other issues that I had with this game. First off, the game is extremely short. It took me about 2.5 hours to complete it. I mean, at $20, I wasn't really expecting anything grand, but I had hoped to get at least 4 hours out of it. I wish the game explored more of the city, as a majority of it took place inside a single building. It does offer a mercenaries-like mode, but I'll be honest, the gameplay wasn't the best. I didn't really want to explore that, so let me in the comments if you did and if you enjoyed that. And the last issue that I had with this game, although a very minor complaint, is the lack of puzzles and the lack of difficulty for the puzzles that it did have. Now, I know the game isn't exactly marketing itself as a big puzzle-driven experience. However, when I think of those classic survival horror games, I remember some of the most interesting puzzles to solve. That trait is something that I really enjoyed about Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. With that being said, Dinobreak does feature a few puzzles, but the issue with the puzzles that it does feature, I feel like it really holds your hand throughout the process. One example is a document telling you word for word to look for the first letter of each name to solve. Another one honestly starts off what looks like it might be a riddle, only to then literally give you 3 out of the 4 numbers needed for the code, and then make the missing digit out of those 4 numbers a small simple math problem. Okay, but with all of that said, it's time for the moment of truth. Let's put a number on this game, and I'm gonna be honest, it's a harder one to rate. The fact is that I could really see this game getting 2 different ratings. One for fans of those classic 90s survival horror games, and one for newcomers of the genre who's never played any of those games. So I'm gonna say this first. If you've never played any of the 90s survival horror games like the original trilogy of Resident Evil, then I would stay away from this game completely, or maybe just go play one of those first and see if you like them before experiencing this game. However, I'm going to rate this as a fan, as it was intended for the fans of this specific genre, and because I'm also a fan of this genre myself. So despite all of the flaws I mentioned, and there are a lot of flaws, I did have a fairly good experience with this game. It's rough to get the hang of, it's really short, and the voice acting annoyed the hell out of me, but as a fan of the classic fixed camera angles, it was still a good time down memory lane. So for me, after comparing it to other games in the same genre, I think it's an average game at best. So I give it a 5 out of 10. I don't think that's bad at all for what the game is and what the game intended to be. And the developers of this game do have talent. They just need to tweak a few things for future titles, and they could easily get to the levels of, say, Tormented Souls. Add more difficult puzzles, tweak the combat a little bit more, and make the variety of enemies stand out a little bit more, and you have a really great indie game that's a perfect love letter to the classics. None of these changes are extremely difficult to pull off in my opinion, which is why I feel like this has a solid enough foundation. Just build up from there and you have a great game on your hands. Anyway, thanks for tuning in for my review of Dinobreak. Hit up the comments and let me know what other indie horror games recently released would you like to see me cover next. Also, if you have played Dinobreak, do you agree with my score or not? Let me know in the comments. But as always guys, I'll catch you on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.